Everybody, I hope you're all well. I miss you. Wish we could be doing this in person. Today, we're going to be talking about how the American political climate has shifted since the 1980s. So, I had asked you to read this and underline some of the key ideas of conservatives. And so, just as kind of an overview here, I'm just going to talk about some key points here. That we see this idea of the pendulum swinging back and forth throughout history. And the pendulum, we talked about that the other day. So we saw the progressive era, and it turned into the return to normalcy. And then we had the New Deal turning into the Eisenhower years. And the Great Society turned into the New Federalism. And we didn't exactly use these words, New Federalism, but what it means, it refers to Reagan's programs to cut federal programs, and they give money to states so that they can decide what to do with it. And it winds up adding an extra layer of bureaucracy, and fewer dollars wind up in the hands of those who need it. So, this is a criticism of that plan, but it's a reality as well. Okay, and so then we see this trend towards conservatism in the 1980s as somewhat of a backlash caused by the changes from the 1960s and 70s. We saw a lot of changes during that era: the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the war on poverty. That's the Great Society. Consumer rights, rights of the accused, environmental legislation like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. And conservatives don't necessarily like these programs. They say it's too much government. It's very expensive to run these programs, and they call them entitlement programs, saying that when you get food stamps, it creates a sense of entitlement among Americans. That they should be given this money and this food by the government. So that's kind of a derogatory term for these programs. And they might even, in our modern day politics, refer to something like Social Security as an entitlement program. And remember, Social Security was created during the New Deal. It's a retirement plan for people to get somewhat, limited pensions in their old age. But it's not really an entitlement program because people pay for it. So the money that you earn when you are working, some of that money goes to the side for Social Security. So, when you get it back when you're older, it's not just the government giving you money, it's something that you've earned. So just be aware when people refer to that as an entitlement and they want to cut it and not give it to people. That's an inaccurate portrayal of the of Social Security. Okay, they also, are part of this backlash refers to some of the changes given African Americans' rights and women rights. So we see the conservatives forming a new alliance. They form special interest groups, and they focus on the issues that are important to them, and they push the conversation to the right. So one of these groups is called the Moral Majority, and so they're focusing on social issues, that they really don't like the idea of women having rights, affirmative action programs helping minorities get ahead. They don't like the idea that Christian ideas are being separated from the mainstream, like this whole idea about the war on Christmas. That's something that would be in keeping with their thinking. And so they formed magazines, newspapers, think tanks to create policies, political action groups to run candidates who share their views. And they were very, very successful in getting these candidates into office. And so some of their ideas, they believe in smaller federal government, reduced taxes, reduced federal spending, deregulation of business, promoting laissez-faire, promoting traditional values. They like prayer in school. They're anti-abortion. They believe in strengthening national defense, and they believe in being tough on crime. And so sometimes that's referred to as a law and order type candidate. Okay. So I had asked you to identify, just this conversation today focuses on the Supreme Court and how they shifted. And so we see a series of decisions in this first chart, and conservatives would dislike these decisions. So we have Engel versus Vitale, and that's conservatives wouldn't like it because they want prayer in school. They wanted an amendment to the Constitution to put prayer in school. These cases involving the rights of the accused, these three. They would feel it was more difficult for the police to do their job, and it goes against their law and order narrative. So this is why conservatives would not like this. We have the Tinker v. Des Moines case where the students have the free speech rights in school. This goes against the hierarchy. Administrators know best, and this allows students to question authority. The New York Times case, where the government cannot get a prior restraint order preventing the press from printing unless national security is truly at stake. And the government should be able to decide what information stays classified. Again, this is like the law and order hierarchy thinking of the conservatives. And of course, we have Roe versus Wade, and that would go against their anti-choice stand. And so if we're going to summarize what conservatives would dislike, these decisions are all pretty liberal. They wouldn't like them because they support the notion of limited government. They protect rights for individuals. This goes against conservative support for law and order and the idea that religion should play a larger role in the government. Then, as the country started to see the influence of these conservatives and see their influence on holding political office, with Ronald Reagan being able to appoint some conservative justices, not only to the Supreme Court, but also to lower federal courts. We see a shift in the makeup of the court decisions. So these cases, this is towards the late 70s, and then these cases are even later than that. We have the Bakke case, which said that affirmative action programs cannot have quotas or they violate the Equal Protection Clause and constitute reverse discrimination. So this was the case about the white man applying to medical school and he didn't get in because there was a quota set aside for African American students. So he claimed that he was discriminated against because he was white. And conservatives would like this decision because individuals should work hard and receive rewards based on their own merit. Affirmative action programs reward people based on race and is an example of government overreach. The TLO case, where schools are allowed to search students without a warrant, and this allows schools to maintain law and order. This Rust v. Sullivan case limits access to abortion, and that would be something that the conservatives would like. And the Vernonia School District, where students can be subject to random drug tests if they're athletes. And again, this allows schools to maintain law and order. So they would like these decisions because of the idea about law and order and limiting access to abortion. And generalizations we can make about the Supreme Court. Earlier, the court was more liberal, and then we see the court becoming more conservative in the 80s and 90s. Okay, and going back to our conversation, our aim, how has the American political climate shifted since the 1980s? Well, we see that the entire conversation has shifted to the right, that ideas that were once considered in the mainstream, for example, the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, which were laws to protect the environment passed in the 70s, supported by Republican Nixon, would be considered pesky regulations in this day and age. And people would argue against that. And so if we look at the Trump administration, we see him unraveling regulations on the environment. We also see programs being cut in the name of this conservative line of thinking. And if you think about how Obama set up a pandemic response team, and conservatives within the Trump administration decided to cut that as a pesky, unneeded government program. And unfortunately, that was cut by John Bolton when he was working for the Trump administration. And so, we see this shift to the right. And so when we go on in our further discussions, we'll see in the 1990s that we have a Democrat, Clinton, elected to office, but he is kind of conservative in ways. Conservatives would never say that, but depending on what time period you're judging him by, he's certainly not as left wing as some of the people from the 1970s and 1960s. All right, everybody, have a great day. Bye.